Today on That's Ambitious, we're going to be talking about the question, how do I write a book about myself? And if you've ever thought, hey, the world needs to know my story and they need to learn from me, then you need to watch this video. We are going to tackle 7 things that you absolutely need to know about writing a book about yourself and 1 thing that you should not do. And we'll get to that in just a moment. Okay, so how do I write a book about myself? Well, it all starts with these 7 things that you need to know and 1 thing that you should absolutely not do. We're not going to get to that thing until the end, so please stick around and hear that because I think a lot of people make this big mistake and I want you to absolutely avoid it. Just before we get started, you should know that I actually have written a book about myself. It's called Suggestology, How to Get What You Want by Asking the Right Questions. And so I have a little bit of experience on the subject, and these are the things that I came up with to answer this question. The first thing is you got to make a list of all of the learning and turning points in chronological order. So look back on your life and start writing however you want to do it, computer or handwritten, whatever, and just go through your life in chronological order from the first time you start remembering what life is about, and then think about all of the major turning points in your life. So maybe that's all the transitional points. For example, when you first went to university, or when you first played in front of an audience or a musical instrument, or when you first did public speaking, or when you first got married, or all of these things that were big turning points in your life, and what did you learn from them? I think that's really important because if you just start writing, there won't be any congruency to it. You have to think about what the audience would respond to in terms of a story, and it's always the highlights. The next thing is, in the beginning, you need to establish the plot and the characters. So think about it like a fiction book where you're the star of your own book, the star of your own movie. Establishing the plot means, well, what is this book actually about? Is it about learning something that gets you to a specific outcome? Is it about taking over? Is it about accomplishing? Is it about failing? What's the book actually about? And in that, you're not the only characters. You have to introduce all of the other characters typically near the beginning. And of course, you can introduce characters throughout the book. But in the beginning, it's really about who are the main characters in this book. Number 3, start escalating the conflict, or escalating the struggle and embellishing the confrontation. So like any good movie, there is this villain that comes along that changes the course of everything. In other words, here's my life the way it used to be, and then all of a sudden something major happened. For example, for me in Suggestology, it was about the turning point where I lost my music career, and I had tinnitus and loud ringing in the ears, and I had tendinitis and all these problems that kind of kicked me to the curb and pushed me down. And I think it's important that in your story, you talk about those things, because one thing that everyone has in common that they can all relate to is we've all struggled at some point. We've all faced adversity and we've all suffered. So it's important to, when you get to that place where the villain comes in, and it could be situations, circumstances, or individuals, and you have to really embellish that. You have to talk about that in detail. Number 4, near the sort of 3/4 of the way through or 2/3 of the way through, you want to talk about the epic battle and then the new normal. So what is the epic battle? The epic battle is when you learn something to take on the villain that came into this situation. In other words, you weren't strong enough before to defeat this villain, but what did you learn since then? How did you go about that process? What did you figure out? And who gave you that information? I think that's always important. Many people tend to forget that when you share information, it's always good to make mention of the people that actually helped you with that information, the mentors, the teachers, the colleagues that shared that information with you. So the epic battle is that sort of period of your life where you overcame adversity. So for example, me, it was about learning from early on from the Peak Potentials team and then some other mentors, and that helped me sort of start my life over, build a business, and really make something of my life. And that period of transition where this battle is going on, where you're turning things around, is a really important sort of focal point of the story. The new normal is essentially right near the end. How are things now? After going through this learning period and going through the epic battle, how did things actually turn out? So when you started jotting down earlier on, when we were talking about point number 1, where you're making a list of all of the learning points and turning points in your life, as you go into this sort of context of establishing the plot and characters, and then escalating the struggle and embellishing the confrontation, and then the epic battle and the new normal, that list of things that you wrote down get put into those 3 things, and that's the chronological order of the book. I hope that makes sense. As you're writing it, each episode or each chapter in the book is a vivid story. And if you're not used to writing stories, the only real advice that I could give is to make them as graphically vivid as possible, describing the situation from all angles and colors and sounds and smells, and really use your words to embellish the 5 senses, to really attack somebody's subconscious and get them to feel like they're part of the story. And I think that's really important from a storytelling standpoint. Even if you're the focal point of the story, and you should still be telling it like it were fiction. And obviously you want to tell the truth and you don't want to over embellish, but you also want to be very crystal clear in painting a vivid picture in somebody's mind of what's exactly happening. In the context of writing a book, I would suggest that you write a new chapter every day for 30 days. The challenge with most people who sit down to write a book is they do it in fits and spurts. There's no sort of congruency of action and energy, because it takes a lot of energy to write a book. But what I like to do, and how I did Suggestology and how I did my other book, is I essentially for 30 days literally sat down and with a computer, and I used a microphone and a dictation software. When you do that, you're actually doing it in plain language, and it tends to take on a better sort of life in terms of words. If we write things with a computer, we try to be overly artistic and overly, putting ourselves in writing mode. So I think it's more important just to sort of dictate as if you were telling your story to a friend, which is kind of cool. So that's my number 7, is use dictation software to make the language more real. So let's do a quick review, and then we'll share with you the number 1 mistake that I think people make when they write a book about themselves. So number 1, making a list of all the learning and turning points. Number 2, establishing your plot and characters early on. Number 3, escalating the struggle and embellishing the confrontation. Number 4, epic battle and the new normal. Number 5, turn each episode or chapter into a vivid story. Number 6, write a new chapter every day for 30 days. And number 7, use dictation software to make the language more plain speak and more real. And then finally, as you were sitting there thinking, are we ever going to get to it? And yes, we are. It's the number one thing that you should absolutely not do. And this might be counterintuitive for many people, but don't make the book about you, about yourself. And I know that sounds weird because the question was, well, how do I make a book about myself? Or how do I write a book about myself? Yes, the story and the characters, I mean, you're obviously the leading character in your own story. All of that is really you, but the book isn't about you. It's about what do I, the reader, take from the story. So even before you sit down and start to write anything, you should really think about, well, what's the point of my story? What is it I'm trying to share with my audience that they can learn from and benefit from? And for example, in Suggestology, one of the things that I do is at the end of each chapter where I've told a story and I've painted a vivid picture, at the end of each chapter, there's what we actually learned from this and some action points on what they should do next. So even though it's a nonfiction book, it's still sharing a story, but it's also going through, okay, what did we actually learn from this? What did I learn from this? And how can you learn from that situation as well? So overall, yes, the book is about you, but the underlying message is for your audience. What will they get out of it? What will they learn? And I think that's super important. So if you have any questions, please write them below and let me know how you feel about this, and I'll certainly respond to you. If you like this video, just give it a thumbs up here. I'm going to post it obviously on YouTube. Give it a thumbs up. Also subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate that. And of course, any comments or questions that you have, I would love to hear from you. So my name is Paul Tobey. Thank you for hanging out with me. This has been How Do I Write a Book About Myself?